My wife slept with someone after we filed for divorce. They are now threatening suicide. TLDR, my wife and I have been together for 6 years, married for nearly 2. In mid-May, we filed for divorce and went our separate ways, though not separating legally. Wife admitted tonight that, 2 weeks after I left, she slept with an old work colleague. That continued on for just over a month, and she now massively regrets it and now realizes what she had with me. She told the colleague that she doesn't want anything to do with him, though he is now threatening to end himself and says that it will be her fault. She said only me and a couple of other friends know about this, but she is suffering through this mental distress alone. Her parents do not know, and she said for me not to tell them. Despite this, they are the closest to her, and only they will be able to help her emotionally and existentially if the colleague does either hurt himself or her. Should I tell her parents? Context: we were always really happy and seemingly had the best time together. Every day, in our spare time, we walked our dog, went hiking, and enjoyed nice food and drink places, all whilst trying to save. At the same time, we weren't frugal to the point of doing nothing either. We aimed to go away on holiday together a couple of times a year, whilst also making time to go out for date night dinners and occasionally drive out for the day on a weekend to shopping centers. During the first 4 years together, I was studying towards professional exams, which was intense and meant that I would work during the day and then study for between 2 and 3 hours on an evening. Understandably, my to-be wife felt lonely whilst I studied, and we eventually got our dog to provide company for her whilst I tried to focus and finish my exams. It is important to point out that I always consciously tried to balance my time whilst studying, understanding that the time when I wasn't studying would be for the two of us, so we walked every night, watched TV series together, went to the gym together, spent much of the weekend days with her family, they lived closer to where we lived, etc. The only major constant tension throughout our relationship and marriage was that she mentioned that she didn't like how much time I spent on my laptop on an evening and that she felt I wasn't giving her enough attention. This was difficult because much of my studies were laptop-based and, for the first 4 years of our relationship, I was studying. For transparency, there were times when, on an evening, I wouldn't be particularly interested in a TV series, and I would be on my laptop producing music to try and earn some side income for the house. I never spent time gaming or doing things that weren't actively seeking to try and better our situation, though. During this time, there were a variety of work situations for my wife that made studying, security, and balance very, very difficult in our relationship. My wife has never known what she has wanted to do for a career, which isn't uncommon. As a result, as soon as a job didn't feel 100% right, my wife felt that it was okay to shift to the next thing and try something new, which I always understood but felt that it provided us with little security or balance. There were a number of jobs that ran on shift patterns, so that made finding time to spend together more difficult. Another role, my wife worked for the emergency services, and large parts of the job were overwhelming and traumatizing, to the point where, before and after every shift, she would have panic attacks and I would provide hours of support and comfort where possible. With this, I tried to actively encourage her not to continue to endure the role if it was in any way not something she wanted to do as a career long term. In another role, my wife was given a final written warning for a protocol breach, though it sounds like there wasn't sufficient training in place. However, this lasted for a year and resulted in there being massive amounts of anxiety and uncertainty about even the slightest issue at work. These instances, combined with my time studying, made the years before marriage challenging. We got through all of it and worked as a team throughout. Around 2 years ago, we got married. Best day ever, felt very loved by family and friends, and shared it with my best friend. At this point, the relationship between my wife and my parents was beginning to strain as my wife didn't invite my mom to her Hindu, as she felt my mom wouldn't enjoy the activeness of the day, and she felt like my mom treated me badly and spoke down to me whenever we were in their company. In the months leading up to the wedding and ever since, my wife actively tried to avoid seeing my family and would always try and leave early at family occasions, or even ask me if she was okay not to come. That drove a wedge between me and my family, as they felt like they had no relationship with my wife and that she didn't like them, as well as her actively being awkward on the few occasions that she did visit. The reasoning she gave behind this was that it felt awkward and intense with my family, and she felt claustrophobic and that my parents weren't good hosts. Around 6 months after we got married, so around 2 years ago, we were on a walk and, out of the blue, my wife told me that she wasn't sure if she wanted to have children, which I tried to reassure her was fine at that point. But she also then said that, if she did want children, she wasn't sure if she would want to have children with me. She referenced this work colleague that had a child, and she said she could envisage him as a father when thinking about it, but had never had those same thoughts about me. I tried to reason that that might have been because this colleague already had a child, so would evidently come across as fatherly when compared with me. I was really unsettled by the second part of her comments, and it left me feeling pretty dejected after around 4.5 years of being together, and also shortly after getting married. Ultimately, it felt like she was saying she didn't want to be with me in a roundabout way. After this, I tried to remain logical and reason that it might be nerves about having children given we are both around 30 years old, and so trying to park that in my brain whilst I looked to finish my last few exams. Around a year ago, I finished my final exams. Just before Christmas, my wife started a new job that wasn't on a shift pattern for the first time. These two things were big changes for us. It was the first time that I hadn't been studying for a couple of hours on an evening during the working week, and also then meant that our working hours were aligned. I'll be honest, we both found this very difficult, as I was used to unwinding from work and studies by producing music on my laptop in my spare time to earn royalties as a side hustle, and my wife wasn't used to having her time outside of work so aligned to mine. As a result, there was this immediate expectation from my wife that all of our time outside of work would be time spent together, especially after a number of years of me completing exams and her being on shifts. Linking back to the bit about the only constant tension throughout our time together, my wife had mentioned over the years that she would only get upset and mention about the time spent on my laptop so many times, before she would grow numb to it and stop asking me to think about rebalancing my time. I always tried to reassure her that all of the time outside of work is either productive time trying to better our situation, which I was always mindful of only doing a few hours on a couple of nights during the week, or spent together doing our bits, walking the dog, gym, seeing family, etc. Shortly into the new year, we were on a dog walk on a Saturday, and I mentioned that I had brought my laptop with me to her family house, whilst her parents were away and we were looking after their dog for the day, and my intention was to spend 10 minutes trying to complete this course that I had signed up for on a free trial to avoid paying for the full course. I was trying to upskill in my spare time. This triggered a nerve, and my wife said, "Can't you go one weekend without being on your laptop?" To which I replied, "I guess you don't support me with it then," meaning completing this course, but she took it as me saying I don't think she supports me with anything. My wife references this moment in time as being that moment she referred to, where she would mention about the laptop so many times, then stop caring. She said from this moment onwards that a switch flicked for her, and she felt numb to me. I tried to speak through this with her and made a really active effort over the next month to minimize my upskilling and hobbies, to be off my laptop a lot more, and to be in the moment even more than I already was. I made a point of not being on any screen at all whilst we watched TV, where normally we would watch whilst I was on my laptop and her on her phone, but my wife would sit there scrolling on her phone, knowing I was sat there trying to engage and be present, but she persisted to message friends and her male work colleague. It is important to point out that, when I was at university, my friends were women, and my wife found that very weird when I told her when we first got together. She brought it up in front of her family maybe a month after I first met them all, and then proceeded to have them agree that it was weird for men to have friends who were women, which I found embarrassing and a little weird at the time. Fast forward back to around February of this year. My wife had been messaging her male work colleague constantly since they started working together on the same team from around the June of last year. My understanding is this was just memes and sharing jokes about work, and ultimately I wasn't threatened at all because I know my own value. In the next 2 months, my wife and I were becoming more distant. We used to travel and to work together on the train, and she would ignore me, not looking at me or speaking. She said she didn't know what to say to me, and that it made her feel awkward us sitting next to each other on the train. I would try and spark conversation on our commute, and when we were at home, but it was small talk and mostly when walking the dog. Largely, This centered around what wasn't going well at work, and I felt like an emotional support best friend, rather than a husband, which was saddening honestly. Our sex life was non-existent at this point, and had been intermittent to say the least for ages. That's a separate thing. But I guess it all feeds into the bigger picture. I recall a particularly awkward shopping trip in around April when we drove out to this shopping center with my sister-in-law, and my wife was speaking to me really poorly, to the point where my sister-in-law told me she felt sorry for me. We talked one evening, and she reiterated that she still wasn't any clearer on whether she wanted to have kids with me, or even whether she wanted to commit to being with me in the future. In the 2 months leading up to us amicably deciding to go our separate ways, I had been really trying to mend things. But my wife said she felt like I hadn't noticed that she was being distant. I tried to reiterate that I had noticed it, and I was actively trying to take steps to bring us closer and talk about things. But she wasn't engaging at all really. During the March, my mother-in-law received some difficult health news that was 50:50 between cancer and a lifelong autoimmune disease. That hit us very hard, particularly my wife, and we put her mother's health before our marriage difficulties, which was the right thing to do in the moment, but, in hindsight, maybe resulted in the following actions perhaps happening when judgment was not clear. Firstly, one random Thursday evening out of the blue in March, my wife announced that she was moving back to her parents' house for some time to clear her head. She came back on the Monday evening, before my birthday on the Tuesday. Thankfully, the doctor said it wasn't cancer, but, as a result of it being the autoimmune disease, a major operation would be needed to remove a piece of an organ. The turnaround was fairly rapid. The operation was scheduled within 2 weeks and then undertaken after another 2 weeks, so mid-April. Understandably, this was unbelievably overwhelming for my wife, and I was doing everything to put our difficulties to one side to support her and her family, and to make sure that all of our attention was devoted to her mom and the upcoming procedure. What the operation did was bring things to a head. Over the course of several evenings a week or so before the operation, we spoke about everything, and ultimately I said that I felt very insecure not knowing whether my wife wanted to be with me long-term or have kids with me. I said that, if she became clear that I wasn't the one she wanted to be with, for her to let me know, as then I would be able to come away without any difficulty and she could pursue whatever she thought she might want. I tried to remain really logical with this, despite my wife saying that, if she were in my shoes, she would have walked away a year and a half ago as soon as she had said that she wasn't sure if she wanted kids with me shortly after we married. I knew that it was the right thing to do to be logical and understanding in that moment because of the situation with her mom, and also the fact that it never achieves the best outcome when emotions take over and it becomes more personal than it needs to. The result of those talks were that she said I should move back home to my parents' house for a week to speak with them and have their support and guidance. I did that and told them everything. Their advice was for me to consider going separate ways as my wife should be certain on me and not doubt being with me after committing to our marriage, alongside being upset for me about the not being sure about having kids with me comment. During this time, my wife spent time at her parents' house, but sent messages which essentially read as though she had decided we should go our separate ways and was calling the decision. When I got home after the week, we met and she confirmed as much, though said she felt I had come back having researched the details about divorce and was surprised I wasn't fighting for us to stay together. I reiterated that I had been fighting in my own way the whole time and that I felt she was numb to me and our marriage. She said that she felt that we might both regret not making a decision now if in 5 years' time we have more commitments, and then it turns out it was the wrong decision to stay together. So that is why she was making a decision now. She also said that she felt pressured to make a decision and that it had all fallen on her to make the decision, though I replied saying that I couldn't be the person to make up her mind for her about wanting to be with me, so ultimately the decision would have to come from her. My mother-in-law underwent surgery that following week, the second week of May, and there was a family breakfast booked on the Saturday morning, a few days after. My wife, my father-in-law and sister-in-law were all going to visit my mother-in-law in hospital that afternoon, but my wife had said how my mother-in-law wouldn't want me to see her in that state, so I was never invited to the hospital. At the breakfast, my wife barely looked at me and didn't speak to me during the whole meal. At this point, her family knew things were not great between us and were barely speaking to me either. It was just unbelievably difficult. After that weekend, she moved back to her parents' house, and I spent that last week on my own in our rented house with our dog. We agreed that we would file for divorce and amicably go our separate ways, not legally separating first, with a view to meeting up before the divorce finalization to check in and see how we each are doing. We never spoke about any rules whilst going our separate ways, as I thought it was implied we would meet up prior to the divorce finalization, and I certainly wasn't considering anything during this 6-month period from filing to finalization. It has now been just under 3 months since we went our separate ways, and my wife has messaged several times to ask how I'm doing and to call. She has said how difficult things are for her and how her life is a mess at the moment, which I tried to talk through with her and provide support. I sent her flowers and a note to say I was thinking of her, because I don't like the thought of her struggling mentally or otherwise. Around 2 weeks ago, she messaged to see how I was doing again. I said I'm taking it day by day, but finding it difficult. She said that her life is a mess, but didn't provide any more specific detail on that when I asked, though she commented that she wished I had called it so that she didn't have to live with the decision she had made. She said the decision is eating away at her, and that she felt maybe we should have had a trial separation first rather than filing for divorce. She also said it felt way too easy for me to just walk away after everything, though I explained that she was the one who pushed for this and she was the one who said they couldn't commit to me. Anyway, fast forward to this evening. My wife messages to ask how I am and if I was free for a call. She said her life is a complete mess and she completely regrets making the decision. She said she massively regrets it and she fed up. I asked what she meant, and she said that when we went our separate ways, her work colleague had admitted his undying love for her, that she then started an intimate relationship with him 2 weeks after I left, after 6 years of being together, with that lasting for just over a month. She said that they had slept together, but that the colleague had turned out to be a really bad person. The colleague has lots of mental health issues, and apparently has been really verbally abusive to her. She said that she had told him that she wants nothing to do with him, but then said that she has been waking up to circa 70 messages every morning with him saying that he is going to end himself, and that it will be all her fault, and she is to blame. My wife is understandably delirious with this because she said she now appreciates what she had and that she was happy before, that she still loves me and wants to be together, but said that I have no idea what it feels like to have someone say they are going to end it because of them. I thanked her for telling me and being honest, and then asked if she had told her family/friends. She said that she won't tell her family as they have been having a hard time with her mother's health and that it would devastate them to learn all of this. At this point in time, it sounds as though she has told them that I wanted for us to go our separate ways due to her not having a good relationship with my parents, which is really silly, but it is what it is. Her telling them the context of this would be essentially her telling them that she left me to be with this work colleague. She told me absolutely not to tell any of her family. In terms of her friends, I think only a few of her friends know, though they aren't the ones receiving the messages, and it is really impacting her. She said that she had a message from him at 3 a.m. the other day, and she went round to find 2 empty vodka bottles and a mallet, with him unconscious, so it does sound like the situation is fairly serious. In terms of the advice I'm seeking, I suggested that she needs to tell her family, as well as reporting him to the police, purely for his safeguarding, as well as to protect her if he becomes angry and decides to take it out on her. At the moment, she said that she is blocking his number for 3 hours at a time, but then he'll start threatening to hurt himself again. So then she unblocks him and messages back to stop him, and it sounds like this is a cycle. What would you do in my situation? I am not obliged to help or support in any way, but I feel really duty-bound to my wife who I have loved over the last 6 years to protect her and look out for her when she may not be looking out for herself in her actions currently. After she told me she slept with someone else 2 weeks after I left, there is no chance of us getting back together, purely out of my own self-respect, but I do want to think about taking action to make sure she doesn't bear the consequences of someone else being infatuated and threatening the guilt of his actions on her. Despite her telling me that I absolutely should not tell her family, my thoughts are that the best way to proceed with this is to inform her family, as the worst-case scenario is that she will be upset with me that I told them and they may be disappointed with her for a while. At least they will then be informed of the potential consequences of this separate situation that she is currently suffering through alone. She told me that she has not had thoughts about hurting herself if her old work colleague does do something to himself, which is the first time she has said anything like that to me. So at this point, I feel like I should go to those who will support her through anything and look out for her best interests. It isn't my place to go to the police, but I figure that her parents may explore this option with her if they do decide to speak with her about it if they see fit.